Hello, nice to be here. I live a slightly crazy, fast-moving life, meeting a lot of the entrepreneurs trying to build the future, traveling a lot, going to the research labs, meeting the investors. And I'm going to try and give you a sense of what I'm seeing now, some of the extraordinary companies, and also talk a bit about the speed that's accelerating of innovation and why, if you're successful in business, you need to change your mindset to keep up. I'm talking a little about this idea of disruptive innovation, but I want to talk about what's happening out there now in startup land. Who here thinks in 10 years we will be traveling in flying cars? Any hands? There's a very brave person. There's two brave people. There are flying cars now being produced by startups like this one in Slovakia. This is called Aeromobil. Small team of people now. You don't need massive money. You can go to crowdfunding websites. You don't need a huge factory. You can use excess capacity in other people's. And what was science fiction is now just another new company for a small team. Think of what's happening in robotics. This is a company that Google bought a bit more than a year ago. Boston Dynamics doesn't just make dogs that you can kick. No robot dogs were harmed in the making of this. It started out working for the US military, making very, very high-cost military robotics. Now it's starting to consumerize it because Moore's law means the price and the effectiveness is kind of transforming. We did a story in Wired about this project. This lady is paralyzed, she's tetraplegic, yet she has a chip directly connecting to her brain that's using her thoughts to control the robot arm so she can drink. This project, BrainGate, I guess is the direct-to-brain interface being put into a real-world action. So everywhere I look, there's something that last year was a crazy idea and now is just another aspect of the supply chain. And it's all connected by this exponential curve, Moore's law's idea that you keep doubling every 18 months or so. So obviously you get much more powerful small computing devices. This one, the size of a grain of rice from the University of Michigan. But it's a new mindset you get. And if you go to Singularity University in California, they're always talking about this is not the linear era anymore. Last century, if you made 30 steps, 1 + 1 + 1, eventually you'd be 30 feet away. But if you double at each step, eventually you'll be 1 billion feet away before you know it. And that's hitting all sorts of sectors. It's changing the reality before people are aware. Something that was expensive becomes free before you know it. If in 1994 I'd say to you, let's start a business where we give away consumer computer storage to business, it was really expensive then. But if I'd said to you, we'll do it, we'll call it Dropbox, we'll become billionaires, wouldn't have made much sense. The same trend is hitting genomics, the falling cost of sequencing DNA on one of these logarithmic scales, the green curve, falling more quickly than Moore's law. What was $100 million just over a decade ago is coming down to a couple of $100. The same is happening in the speed at which a company comes from nowhere, becomes $1 billion company. It used to take 20 years, now it's less than 2 years. The speed of adoption by consumers of new technology. Again, everything's moving faster. The world is never going to be as slow as it is now. So when something new comes on the market, a new gadget, like this one in 1983, with new celebrity endorsers, you can't dismiss it like you used to be able to, because it changes behavior very, very quickly. And if you're the incumbent, you really have to change your approach. So the big incumbent in 1983 that had more copper cables connecting the world's telephones than anybody else was AT&T in America. Millions of miles of cables connecting people's landlines. And they didn't know whether to ignore the mobile telephone or to invest it. They'd actually developed a lot of the underlying technology through their Bell Labs. But they had to call in McKinsey to tell them whether this was going to be significant or not. And they said to McKinsey, tell us how many of these mobile telephone devices you think there'll be in America by the end of the 20th century in 17 years. McKinsey goes and does its calculations and comes back with a number. Says we think it could be fairly significant. It could be almost 1 million mobile phones in America, which wasn't a bad guess. It was slightly out. And there's, I guess, 3 lessons I draw from that. First of all, don't forget Moore's law, the form factor, the utility changes very quickly. Secondly, don't think about it as technology. Think about human needs. Think about this is actually not gigahertz, megabits. It's about connecting yourself with your loved ones, filming things that you really enjoy, playing games with your friends online. And the third mistake I think McKinsey made was they framed their thinking in a very fixed 1983 way. And social norms change. In 1983, if you'd want to make a phone call, you'd go to the call box, you'd go back to the office, you'd go home. Today, if you take one of these away from your 14-year-old for more than 6 seconds, it's a human rights abuse, and you'll be sent to The Hague. And just think of these devices, how they've changed expectations. There's now apps to tell you how many times a day you're checking your apps because we're so addicted to these things. There's new medical conditions. This is called the 3-dot anxiety. You're so anxious to see what somebody's typing. Selfies are no longer the thing you need to be doing to keep cool. You now need to take a picture of your rear end. This was a genuine product launched last year, the Belfie. Actually, the Belfie and the selfie are probably not cool. You now need your own drone following you with a droney, taking pictures of you from the sky. But this is actually where consumer engagement is going in an incredibly quick way. This is a slide from Mary Meeker, her latest Internet Trends report, showing the amount of hours Americans, adults, spend on screens since 2008. So the blue is the laptop and the desktop, the green is the mobile device, and the yellow is everything else. But look, it's gone from 2.7 hours a day in 2008 to, so far this year, 5.6 hours a day. And you know, that's changing every kind of interaction, every kind of business. I'm from a magazine business. We make a print magazine, but we also have to think, how do we compete for that engagement? If you're selling something, how do you compete for that shopping basket experience? So this is something that means every business is going to have to compete. So, you know, do you get one of these? So Starbucks has a chief digital officer who's done all right, Adam Brotman. He came in with all sorts of strategies thinking, we need to connect the online experience, which is what every consumer is doing, with the offline experience of getting the coffee. And he came up with ways of prepaying for your coffee, and the shop knows where you are. A loyalty card, so there's a lot of data they know about you, which is now kind of a $3 billion business. Think of how the consumer may want to pay, new kind of ways to make it easy for them to pay using QR codes or partnering with Square. Even, let's think of convenience. What are the friction points in the consumer's day? Their phone is running low. If they come to Starbucks, they can use this wireless charging device. It's rethinking. They're not selling coffee. They're selling access to convenience, to that third space in your life, but also where you can solve a few problems. And it's working for them. They're getting relatively high revenues per employees, and compared with companies like Apple and Google, a relatively high return on assets. But a chief digital officer implies there's one person who thinks about digital, and maybe you need to think about a chief data officer. You know, each company has to work out the best way to get that spirit of innovation inside. Reed Hastings at Netflix, one of the fastest growing media companies, going international very quickly, is obsessed with data. We did a cover story about him at Wired not too long ago, and you know, they had a competition to try and come up with a better algorithm to create recommendations based on your watching. They gave away a $10 million prize for the algorithm. This is the one that won. But things were moving so quickly, and they had so much new knowledge based on the data they're tracking with every remote control click. They didn't even implement this because it was soon outdated. And they've now they've divided your viewing categories into 78,000 different types of programming, because they've worked out there are certain types of people who like you know, a prison drama with a woman prison officer in this part of the world. And they're measuring constantly what you like. And the machine told them, the data told them, there was unfulfilled demand for a political drama. They weren't getting enough political drama. So they were bold enough to go and make one, not one series, but 2 series of House of Cards, which turns into their biggest hit, not because human beings said you should do this, but because the data said. Or do you become a company that has their chief innovation officer, which is a whole other way of looking at this? So every company needs now to think, what do we do? How do we get that spirit of competitiveness with this fast-growing market inside our business? And I'll give you an example of a company you wouldn't think of as having, senior innovation staff. It's a chicken sandwich takeaway based in Atlanta in the United States. It's a very Christian company. They get into trouble for, giving money to anti-gay organizations, but it's actually a family-owned business that's been going since the 1940s, no debt, and it's opening about 80 or 90 new branches a year. It's got about 2,000 branches, and it's highly profitable. And I went to see them a few weeks ago, and what's really interesting is you wouldn't think there's much space to innovate in a chicken sandwich fast food restaurant. Next door to their headquarters, they have an 80,000 square foot innovation building where they encourage all the staff to come and spend a couple of days, where they're kind of rethinking the whole experience of going into a restaurant. They've turned some of the fake restaurants in that building into classrooms. 3D printers all over the place, so they're trying to work out how we can optimize the way we iterate what we have in our buildings, new kind of devices. They're trying to get everybody who comes in there to think in new ways, to challenge basic assumptions. There's post-it notes everywhere and Lego, so you can prototype new kind of products. Virtual reality goggles, I took a photo that I saw on a wall, so how do you simulate the experience of going into that store for people who aren't there? Even scientific studies of queuing. What is the optimal way to get people to stand in line that doesn't make them annoyed, but that gets people coming through? So with all these choices, I'm going to give you like 10 kind of new fixed points, I think, that all sorts of businesses, if you're making a physical product, if you're in financial services, if you're in IT, you need to think if you're going to make this transition to a world that isn't as slow as it used to be. And the first one, I guess, is Mark Andreessen, the founder of Netscape, wrote a famous article in the Wall Street Journal a couple of years ago arguing that software is eating the world. And I think he talked about it's going to transform next education and healthcare, but it's also going to transform everything. So, his view is he's now a big successful investor at Andreessen Horowitz. Find the opportunities where software hasn't yet transformed things. The law, accounting, physical manufacture, and it's about to. And if you just look at, physical goods, if I want these kitchen appliances now, I don't need to go to the store. I can just download a file from Shapeways and print them locally. 3D printing is moving so quickly that there are now companies like this called Cartesian that have the technology to allow you to print electronic circuitry inside a physical product that you've made. So now we can create all sorts of physical devices that have electric current going through them in a controlled way. Think of 3D printing in space. This is a startup that's been working with NASA. So this gentleman on the space station recently needed a new wrench, so it was emailed to him as an attached file on an email, and then he printed it out locally in the space station. Think of digitization hitting medicine. Think of medical imaging. This is a company called EchoPixel. You can do real-time 3D imaging of a patient in a way you never could before. So this changes the expectation of the patient and the surgeon, their interaction. You will expect pretty soon to have this much more granular, detailed knowledge. And we're now at the stage where we're printing DNA. There are companies like Cambrian Genomics that are allowing you to design living things on a screen and then print out the DNA. It's an interesting growth in biohacking. The idea that you know what bits of DNA do so you can put them together. There's a growth of like amateur workspaces, biohack spaces, where people are taking like the bioluminescent DNA from one creature and putting it into another. And an example of how people are thinking, there was a project not too long ago to try and biohack trees so they glow in the dark, so you won't need lampposts.
What if we use trees to light our streets instead of electric street lamps? Imagination and innovation are the forces that have advanced our civilization throughout history. Our generation's frontier is synthetic biology. Our guide, nature itself. And as usual, the potential is limited only by our greatest imagination. So why do we need this when we can use this? Inspired by fireflies and aquatic bioluminescence, our team of Stanford-trained PhDs, Carl Taylor and Omli Drury, are using off-the-shelf methods to create real glowing plants in a do-it-yourself biolab in California.
So first, basically,
I love the idea they're not thinking small. They're thinking, we could save a lot of energy. So at the same time, we've got used to thinking of this is online, this is offline. That division is disappearing as sensors connect trillions of items. The Internet of Things will tell the RSA when there's nobody sitting in that chair, so you will know when your coffee cup needs to be replaced. So every business now needs to be part of that network, and it changes how you think of your own business, no matter what you're making. Tony Fadell used to work at Apple, led the team that made the original iPod, then worked on Steve's phone, and then he left to create a thermostat because he saw a much better opportunity in connecting things that everybody uses that had not been reinvented for this world of software. So the Nest, which has sensors that knows who's in the room, that has algorithms that can work with you to optimize your energy, is the start, I guess, of creating that dashboard for the physical world that we all encounter, taking that data and making it available to us in useful ways. Google bought that company last January for $3.2 billion. Google, again, making a very big bet on getting that dashboard to the sensor-enabled world. And, increasingly, we are all on the network wearing these kind of devices, or maybe our dogs are wearing these kind of devices. If you're making something physical, you now have to think of the networked version of this, the basketball that tracks how good your shots are and sends notifications to your smartphones. We did a project at Wired, what happens when the whole streetscape is connected. The taxi will get directions based on your online schedule, and the sandwich shop knows you're approaching, knows what you like, starts to make your chicken sandwich before you get there. Probably more important, the smartphone warns you of an ex-girlfriend or boyfriend ahead so you can cross the road. But we're entering a world where sensors everywhere, tiny, powerful computers everywhere. You won't notice when there's a transaction happening. Services built in. There is no offline anymore. John Chambers, the outgoing boss at Cisco, talks about a $19 trillion economic opportunity in the next 10 years. Says for businesses, the sensor-based network will be 5 to 10 times as significant as the browser-based internet. And we're already starting to see a lot of industries start to get transformed. Think about aviation.
What makes a machine brilliant? When it improves the lives of everyday people.
One of the things that the consumer may not see today is just how complex airline operations are. Typical airline, 600 plus planes, 3,000 routes every day, complex network. It is humanly impossible when there's a major disruption for somebody to figure out what the optimal approach is and get them back on schedule.
With this joint venture between GE and Accenture, the industry finally has the ability to predict in advance any kind of problem that the aircraft might have.
Our objective is to help the airlines avoid all forms of unplanned delays through both maintenance, where we are predicting what's happening on the aircraft, but also through the operations side, where we're giving the airlines early warning of what's happening. There's a number of sensors on this for control, so when it's running you can know various things about its performance. So that's wired through the aircraft, and then it comes off on the wireless quick access recorder links, and then we can do the processing and we can send the airlines the results.
It's huge amounts of data coming off of every aircraft, and our technology understands the different behaviors and is able to predict and prevent a delay from happening, and when it does, recover from that delay as quickly as possible to get back into the day-to-day operations.
We're impacting the quality of life for everyone involved in air travel by getting people to where they need to get to and making everybody's lives better.
It's going to happen in every kind of other sector. I'm starting to see startups now, small, low-funded startups. This is one in London. A couple of young guys go into old industrial factories, the boring factories that just happen to make a profit. They make, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of pounds a year. And they've never had sensors if they're making carpets or car tires. So these guys are going in and measuring everything and creating a dashboard so they can tell in advance if their conveyor belt is going to need taking out of service. And, you know, if you have downtime that's maybe 1 or 2% of your time and you're a $100 million company, that could mount up. Think of weather. You know, farmers don't need insurance now if they've got the data from the Climate Corporation, which takes millions of data points and helps predict exactly what the farmer needs to do. They were bought by Monsanto for almost $1 billion. In container ships, there are now companies like this with these little units. This is called CargoSense, that takes measurements of humidity in the container box, what direction it's facing, how fast it's moving, and offline you can get this amazing data from the other side of the world. The Internet of Babies. We're now connecting babies to the network. If you're a neurotic parent, we have products for you. There's this one. It's a little chain you put on the ankle to track them. In the UK, we usually do this to convicted criminals, but this is now being a good parent. So one of the other things is we're all commodified now. Barriers to entry are collapsing. Anybody can become a hardware company. Anybody can get crowdfunding. So I think the companies that are going to win in this new digital world are those that compete with the commodity by adding value that the digital world can't easily add. McLaren, we've just written about in Wired magazine this month. Now, it's a car company, I thought, but I was wrong. So yes, it does Formula One, and it makes very nice sports cars. But what I learned is because it has to invest so heavily in R&D to get the sensors to give it data in real time in a map, in a race, so it can take the car into the pit when it needs to. It's really a data analytics and visualization business that's doing all sorts of interesting things, starting businesses that use this knowledge to optimize a toothpaste factory west of London, or they're making health devices now in partnership with other people. They're working with the Air Traffic Control Agency to optimize where the aircrafts should be on the taxiways at Heathrow based on incoming data, based on weather data. So a company like McLaren now has the most profitable unit of the company, the part that works with outside partners to try and take telemetry, data analytics, to solve their problems based on their own value. Looking at the value a company can add to the commodified world, who would want to run a bookshop nowadays, right? It's not an easy business. You're competing with Amazon and lots of others online. Round the corner from here in Mayfair is this bookshop that's been going since 1936, has a royal coat of arms, and they're doing really well because they've reframed their value. They're not selling books as much as becoming experts in book collections. So they will now curate you a personal library. They did a bespoke library recently for a client in a Swiss ski chalet. 3,000 books they put in there, and they charged £500,000. So that is value that the network, the commodity network, can't easily compete with. Think of commodity HD cameras. There's 1 million companies that can make cheap HD cameras. Why is GoPro able to charge multiples for their GoPro Hero cameras? Why is GoPro a multi-billion-dollar company after its IPO? Because it's not selling a camera, it's reframed the value it adds. It's a place you go to share your lifestyle, your skiing into avalanche videos. The homepage of GoPro is like a media company. So they've moved away from what they actually make into the idea that differentiates them from everybody else. So I think every company now needs to think, what is going to differentiate us? Because everybody else now can come into our business. The 16-year-old in Bangkok can start competing with a legal firm in London. Maybe security is your benefit. This is something increasingly every company is going to be threatened by. I know if I'm a financial organization or a media organization or a government organization that it's going to be really damaging to me if data leaks out. Yet I have to assume that I don't have the up-to-date expertise that can stop these breaches. So I would pay more to a company that I could trust to look after me. Saudi Aramco, you know, they got breached by virus in a USB, took down 75% of their hard disks. 14-year-old in a Polish town just for a bit of fun, took down the local tram system. So, you know, everybody in this room, I would say, we need to think not just are we vulnerable, but, you know, what do we do because we're vulnerable? So this is getting to be interesting. Robotics is growing quickly and changing big sections of industry before we realize. This is 2005. Google was one of the sponsors of DARPA's Grand Challenge. This car is doing what no car had done before, going through the desert without a driver. And Google then hires a few of the team and then starts working on its own self-driving car. This is Google's video of the self-driving car being ridden by the blind man. But very quickly, this crazy idea becomes a product. I was talking to senior people at Audi on Monday and said, how long until you think you're selling fully autonomous cars in the UK? And the answer really kind of surprised me. They said about 2 to 5 years. So again, from science fiction to taking another industry and changing the rules. I just wrote a story last month in Wired about this gentleman who runs a company in London called DeepMind. His name is Demis Hassabis, and DeepMind has a big ambition. It's trying to solve general artificial intelligence. It's trying to build a machine that thinks like people. So clearly it's not an easy problem to solve. It's going to take him decades, maybe 3 decades, 4 decades. So they have no revenue, no products, but they have a team of 150 people near King's Cross. And when I went to see Demis, he was very excited that finally they had taught the machine how to play Space Invaders. So he said, all we did was tell the machine to try and get the highest score. We didn't explain the rules. We just took the pixels as the data input. The first half hour, he said, the rocket kept getting killed. An hour later, it starts to recognize when to shoot, when to hide. He said, we left it on all night. By the morning, it was the world's best ever Space Invader player, better than any human being. As I say, they have no revenue or product in the market. It didn't stop Google buying them for £400 million last February. And you have to think what AI is going to do as it rolls out into more and more business as well as consumer applications. Again, it's going to change the rules, so you have to think, how do you compete? How do you add value?
Mr. Theodore Twombly,
this is a film
welcome to the
called
world's
Her
first artificially
last
intelligent
year
operating
about a man
system.
whose operating system is so intelligent he falls in love with it.
Are you social or antisocial?
I guess I haven't been social in a while.
How would you describe your relationship with your mother? Thank you. Please wait as your operating system is initiated.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Samantha.
Unfortunately, he falls in love with the operating system, but she's got 9,000 other boyfriends in the system, so it doesn't end very well. So in popular culture, AI is this kind of scary, you know, destroy the world thing. It's actually more mundane. Many of us are using it with our, you know, iRobot vacuum cleaners or your SwiftKey predictive text. And I guess some of the early applications of DeepMind will be in simple things like better YouTube recommendations at Google. But we're getting into a world where, you know, the various areas of AI are starting to be very significant on all sorts of businesses. Already a lot of advertising is being bought by algorithms.
What if your devices could read your emotions and respond to them? Emotioned is developing technology to do just that. Our industry-leading emotion-aware system will enable a revolution in device and application personalization. We're taking more pictures and videos than ever before. Imagine organizing this content by emotion, so your most memorable moments are easier to find.
So the machine is knowing how you feel as well as what you're saying. It's also recognizing faces in new ways, and it's also using data and algorithms to predict things. Again, in agriculture, projects like these are helping precisely target where nutrients, where water, where fertilizer should go, which could help alleviate a food crisis. It's affecting language, real-time translation now on Skype. Even journalists are being disrupted. There's a company called Narrative Science that writes news stories without any humans needing to be there. It's being used at the moment on Forbes for their business news, which I think is tremendously bad news. The fifth of the rules is when I'm thinking about the future, I don't think of, you know, the sophistication of the technology, I think of the humanized face of it, because it's us in the end who decide whether we're going to use a product. This was going to be the big year of wearable computing. And you remember Google invested pretty heavily and aggressively, was pushing Google Glass, and it didn't work, because that's not very human. For an industrial job, fine, but you don't want to walk around the street with this because it just gives out the wrong signals. Whereas there's now a growth of companies making clothes that have sensors embedded in them. This is a company called OmSignal that's working with people like Ralph Lauren. So the jumper has sensors that connect this gentleman's heart rate, his steps, his breathing. It even claims to know his mood. This gentleman apparently is excited. Wearable computing, if you wear a ski visor, this is a company called Recon that projects data, shows you where you are, shows you how fast you're going. That's actually more useful. So sometimes I see what's the future by what it's not going to be. This is the London startup called Ease that's trying to solve the payments problem by the guy wearing Google Glass. And then when he gets his bill on the date, he is presented with a QR code on a tablet, and he nods twice. Yeah, you're laughing that he gets the girl. That's probably not the future. The future is, you know, seamless, passive in the background. The NIME wristband tracks your heartbeat pattern. That is the way it authenticates you into the system. That takes away the friction. So friction, I think, is key. And a lot of the companies that are winning in this disruptive war are those that take friction out of the way and people start becoming addicted to their services. Because if you're in a world where you touch a button and magic happens, you don't really want to go through these horrible processes that slow you down when you want to actually give somebody some money. So in finance, there are companies like Klarna and TrustDev that are growing very fast, trying to carry that risk and allow that journey to payment to be seamless. Think of Uber. When you sign up, they've thought about how they can minimize every touch you have to make on your screen. When you get out of the car, you don't even need to have to do anything. It pays automatically. And when you sign up, you don't even have to type in your credit card number to open an account. It just gives you the opportunity to photograph your card, and it will do the rest. And I think every business now has to think, what are the fewest touch points I can give to the people who are working with me to make things easier for them? That's Uber's valuation. And I just want to talk about some of the bad experiences we've become used to. This is about e-commerce. This is about some of the really rubbish things that if you're buying something online, you're putting up with. If buying a loaf of bread in the supermarket was as hard as buying things from a lot of retailers online, this is what it would be like.
Hey, just that, thanks.
You sure?
Yeah.
Username?
Oh, Nick M?
No.
NM 1983?
No.
Zandy Pops?
Sorry.
Zandy Pops?
No, okay, don't worry, I'll help. What's your postcode?
Oh, it's GU749ZT.
Welcome back, Nick Forever. Please listen carefully to this bread license agreement before continuing with your purchase of a loaf of bread. If you do not, blah, blah, blah. You also agree not to use any bread-based product for any purposes prohibited by United Kingdom law, including without limitation, design, development, manufacture of missiles, chemical, nuclear, or biological weapons.
Tick.
I'm afraid you've timed out.
What? Sorry. Hello? Excuse me. Oh, yeah, hey.
Just one loaf, sir?
Yeah, we just...
What's your username?
It's Nick Forever, but number 4, not the...
Gotcha.
Yeah.
OK, I'm just going to check that you're a real person. Could you say that for me?
It's not even a word.
OK, how about this one?
You know what, forget it.
Or this one?
Hippo Potter Mice.
You're in.
Great, I'm in.
£8.85.
It's supposed to be 98 pence.
Plus express delivery.
What's that?
Oh, well, it's express delivery. It's fast. So there's,
That was actually a promotion for Google Analytics, but you get the picture, which is why there's a growth of companies like Postmates making money trying to connect you in real time in half an hour with something you want in the city. eBay's doing 1 hour delivery. Amazon started to do 1 or 2 hour delivery. They've got a supermarket chain growing in the States to do same afternoon delivery, because that's what people want. Even, you know, drone delivery of your medicine in San Francisco by this sort of company. Another thing you have to think ahead about is how people are going to want to interact with the network. This is going to be very big news in about a year. A lot of companies are going to be issuing their virtual reality headsets with lots of businesses now being forced to prepare content for it. So if you think about it, it's not just for gaming and entertainment. If you're a travel company, you're going to have to show what the hotel room or the beach is like. The Norwegian army is already issuing these headsets to its tank drivers so they can see extra layers of information around the corner. Microsoft is making a hologram-based
digital world
device,
is
the
blended
HoloLens.
with your real world. Now we can. This is the world with holograms. What will they enable us to do? New ways to visualize our work.
I have an idea for the fuel tank.
New ways to share ideas with each other.
And again, these things become the norm very quickly.
I just put the images in OneDrive.
Them to be there. And then there's crazy companies like this one's called Magic Leap, which we don't know much about. We do know it's had $500 million in venture capital funding, and it does something by shining a light into your eye. And they've just put these teaser videos online, so it may be something to do with flying elephants. Your guess is as good as mine, but $500 million for one company. A couple more of the big trends you have to watch out for. We're at one of those Marxist revolutionary moments where power has moved from the organization, from the boss, from the hierarchy, to the network, where it's being distributed. Anybody on the network now has new powers. It means that when I was in Kuwait recently, the sheep market is no longer in a physical place. It's on an Instagram page. This is a real phone number. This is where the sheep farmers buy and sell their sheep. If you want to buy one for your loved one, go ahead. Nobody gave them permission to do this, but because everybody's on the network, it just makes sense. All these companies, games company, dating company, travel company, have one thing in common. Who wants to guess? One guess. You can pay for their products using a new kind of currency called Bitcoin, which doesn't look like this because there's no physical currency. It's a digital virtual currency, but it's not got a central bank, it's not got an owner, it's owned by the crowd. And it's actually going to be very significant, not so much the currency, but the backbone to the network called the blockchain, which records every transaction. And for the first time, we have this massively distributed book of trust. So you can keep your health records in there. The government, if it wants, can work out what tax you owe through this. It's all sorts of things. And again, it's coming from nowhere. It's not going to just disrupt the financial world. It's going to disrupt, healthcare. Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, is betting a lot on Bitcoin currency businesses. And I asked him to write an article for us on what he's excited about. And he says, for the first time, you can actually program extraordinary things into money because it's open, it's distributed, and it's software-based. And we're moving from a world where it was closed, people decided the rules, to an open world where, in insurance now, people on the network are creating syndicates of insurance to save themselves money. Car insurance now is a London startup where peer-to-peer insurance is working. And it's happening to hardware as well. Just when IBM was dominating computers, there was a crowd of enthusiasts that met at the Homebrew Computer Club to make new products like this. We're in the same position again. Places like Tech Shop, a chain of huge buildings where anybody can go in and use tools, sewing machines, laser cutters, 3D printers, to make products, to sell them. You used to need, I guess, a Shenzhen factory to make something. Now you just need Kickstarter. We wrote about this guy, Eric Migakovsky, who had an idea for a smartwatch about 2 years before Apple were talking about one. So he goes to Kickstarter. In fact, they recently went for their second version of the Pebble smartwatch. They thought they'd need $500,000. They raised $20 million. So that can buy you capacity in somebody else's factory. That can do your marketing. So again, there's nobody saying this company should win apart from the networked crowd. Which leads me to a couple of final rules. You need to compete in your thinking with these companies. In Facebook, in California, they have posters like these on the wall. Move fast and break things. This is that mindset. Don't respect the rules, just try something new. Get it out there even if it's not quite ready, and then just measure the response. What kind of business are we? Existential questions. And it means if you're the boss of a very successful company, this is Jeff Immelt of GE, one of the world's biggest industrial companies, you now have to not just understand the startup threat, but maybe work with the startups, maybe collaborate with the crowd. Jeffrey Immelt is collaborating with this gentleman, Ben Kaufman, who runs a business called Quirky, which is a community of amateur inventors that every week vote up things that they think should become products, and they make new products, like 2 or 3 of these new products a week. So GE has very bravely given their entire IP portfolio to the Quirky crowd and said, if you can find something that we haven't thought of to do with this, we'll back you, we'll make a product together, which is quite bold. Finally, just when I think I understand these new changes, something new comes along and even changes my assumptions. So just think of 3D printing, which I mentioned, which I thought was very, very slow, additive manufacturing, making engine blocks with titanium or steel very, very slowly. It's now all sorts of things. In China, they're 3D printing houses in 24 hours. This is a new process that was announced in March this year, a company called Carbon 3D. This is a real-time demo, printing your Eiffel Tower out of this blue goo much more quick, maybe 100 times as quick as the conventional processes. So 3D printing that was extraordinary and new is now just old. In fashion, there's a whole growth of companies in places like London. You know, this is a knitting machine. It was hard to program. You used to have to get an expert to program it, but all the big fashion retailers, manufacturers use them. There's now a London startup that's reverse engineered it using software, so anybody can design something, and it prints out one of a kind, and it's not much more expensive than doing 1,000. You can print one.
What I find fascinating
Google is now working with Levi's to embed electronic fibers in clothes. It's called Project Jacquard.
That means that if you just replace some of the threads in textiles with conductive threads, you should be able to weave the textile, which can recognize a variety of simple touch gestures, just like any normal touch panel you have on a mobile phone. So if you can hide or weave interactivity and input devices into the materials, that will be the first step to making computers and computing invisibly integrated into the objects and materials and clothing.
So your genes are about to become computers. And, you know, you can't keep your assumptions for very long. I thought Elon Musk at Tesla was making cars. Turns out his business is really about batteries. He's now making these battery storage units that they're selling to American households so they can get off the electric grid. And that, again, changes the nature. So, you know, in the classic world where Kodak invented the digital camera and then kind of buried it because it wasn't convenient for their business model, these guys had the same challenge at the same time in Japan. And I guess Fujifilm thought, we are being commodified. We can't ignore this. We can't pretend digital film isn't going to exist. So they had to change their mindset and thought, right, where is the value that we add to this commodified network? We know about imaging. Let's go and create a medical imaging unit. We know about light. Let's create a cosmetics unit. Fujifilm have done okay. Sometimes a company has the opportunity to move into the future, and it is too hard for them to see it. In 1999, Blockbuster were approached by consultants and told, why don't we help you set up a streaming service? Broadband is expensive and slow, but that's going to change soon. They weren't interested. Wasn't what they wanted. These guys, meanwhile, came along. So I'll leave you with what happens when an emerging technology comes up for the first time. 2007, this phone hits the market. The head of another big tech company that made smartphones was asked on TV what he thought about the iPhone. This is what he said.
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
How did that work out, Steve Ballmer of Microsoft? So I think about this a lot because, you know, I edit a very shiny Condé Nast magazine. Now, obviously, we do websites and we have digital apps, and we, you know, now increasingly are making our money through things like conferences, and we have a consulting business working with companies trying to help them understand it. But I worry about consumer change, the next generation. What happens when kids like these become the next consumer? Because their expectations are going to be very different. The problem with the magazine is you can't pinch and zoom it. And you can't swipe it. But I have to go with her expectations because that is my future. Thank you for listening.